So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through how to install, set up and launch Hunch. Now Hunch is a threat aggregation, predictive policing-esque tool, and the idea behind it is that it goes off to social media websites looking for specific users, aggregates the information from those users, uses natural language processing on that information, and then gives those users a score of how likely they are to commit a crime. Now eventually the goal of Hunch is to take this framework and implement it into the computer security landscape so that we can look at potential malicious actors and decide a score of how likely they are to commit a cybercrime. So what we're going to need to do first is we're going to need to clone the Git repository that Hunch is on. Now this is as simple as going to the repository, taking the URL to clone, going into a terminal and cloning it. So what we're going to do next is install the dependencies that Hunch needs. The way we're going to do this is we're going to install them all from the requirements.txt file. Now this is in the root directory of Hunch, and all we'll have to do is do pip install -r requirements.txt, and that will install all of the dependencies. Next you're going to have to set up all of the APIs that Hunch uses. Now there's three main APIs. There's the AWS Comprehend API, there's the Reddit API, and then there's the Twitter API. When it comes to the AWS CLI API, one of the main things that you're going to have to do is make an IAM role with the Comprehend Full Access group. Now this is really so that we can use natural language processing from AWS Comprehend. For the Reddit API it's quite simple. All we have to do is create a new developer application on Reddit, and then we can use the API keys from that in our config file. This is the same for the Twitter API, however Twitter currently has an application process to request an API key, so it's slightly more long-winded. When it comes to populating these API keys into Hunch, the way that we do this for the AWS CLI is by typing in AWS configure, and then we'll get a series of options that we can populate with the information from our API key. When it comes to populating our Reddit and Twitter API keys, these can be done in the core_config.json file, which is in the root of our Hunch directory. Now there are several key value pairs at the bottom of this config file that we'll have to populate if we want to use Reddit and Twitter. Now it's not necessary to use either Reddit or Twitter for this tool, however for this example that's what we're going to be doing. Next we're going to open up Pycharm, and this is so that we can run Hunch. So this is as simple as finding the example_profile_script.py in the root of the Hunch directory and clicking run. Now this is just an example of how we could run Hunch, and what this will do, this will go into the JSON_files folder and run every JSON file that it can see. Running the example script can take anywhere between 5 and 30 minutes depending on how many users we've asked it to profile. Because we've asked it to profile everything in the JSON files folder, there's quite a lot of files in there. So this is going to take around 30 or so minutes. So we're going to come back to it once it's finished doing that profiling. So I thought I'd go into a bit of how Hunch actually works before we continue. So Hunch is broken down into three main sections. That's the collectors, the methodologies, and the analyzers. The way that the collectors work is that they'll take a JSON file of a specific format. They'll take the information from that file, they'll add it to a class, and then they'll go off to a specific source and user. So for example, they might go off to John Doe's Twitter account. Then they'll take all of the tweets from that account and then send them over to a methodology. Now that methodology is going to do specific checks on it, and it's going to use an analyzer to do that. It's going to say, okay, well, does this account contain reference to any close relationships? Does this account contain reference to any goals or aspirations? And it's going to use the analyzers to do that, because the analyzers will have access to the natural language processing tool, or specifically in our case, AWS Comprehend. And then finally, those methodologies are going to aggregate a score. They're going to say how likely this specific individual is to commit a crime. And then they're going to send that back to the user in the form of a display. So coming back to it, it's been about 20 or so minutes. Our processing is finished and Hunch is ready to show us the display. So we're going to do that by going to localhost on port 8050. Once we've done that, we're going to be asked to type in a username and password. Now this is what was populated in the config file that we saw earlier on. By default, it's just user and password all lowercase, but it can also be set so that it doesn't have a password at all. So next we're going to be shown to the Hunch UI. Now this is quite simple and bare bone at the moment, but we have three main sections. We've got our prioritization, our profiling, and our analysis. On the prioritization screen, we can see all of the individuals we've profiled, prioritized on their risk. On the right, we can also see all of this information displayed in a graph, with the y-axis being the risk and the x-axis being the likelihood. On the next screen, we have the profiling screen. Now what we can see here is the ability to profile individuals from the UI rather than having to do it from the Python interface. So this final section is where we can start comparing these individuals. We can start asking the question of why does this individual have such a high risk? And we can also start pivoting off this information. We can say, well, has the user mentioned any URLs, any names, any blacklisted words? And we can start building this knowledge base. So what we're going to do next is do an example profile of an account. So we're going to go get the JSON file of a previously profiled account. This one just so happens to be Barack Obama. We're going to then change the name of it and then re-profile it. And then so hopefully when this is finished, we'll be able to see the difference or see the two new users. Once we've done this, we're going to need to refresh the UI because currently it doesn't update automatically. We're then going to wait about 20 or so minutes and we can actually see it continuing through Python. And once that's finished, we're going to come back to the UI and we're going to be able to see that it's finished and it's updated and added this new profile. So we're going to refresh the page once again, and again now we can see that we have a new user. We have Barack Obama 2, which is what we set the name to be. And because this profile was exactly the same as the previous Barack Obama, it has the exact same impact and it has the exact same risk. So if we compared the two, which we can do in the analysis section, we have the exact same information, which is what we'd expect. And there we have it. We've looked up how to install Hunch, how to set it up, and how we can use it to profile specific individuals from specific sources. Now if you do have any questions, or you have a specific use case that you think Hunch would be useful for, then feel free to let me know. There's also a few more videos online which I show how this specific framework could be used in the wild.